Go back to August of 1997. On a rainy night, Flight 801, a Boeing 747-300, slammed into the side of Nimitz Hill in Guam because of human error. The captain was tired, and the other officers didn't say a single word, even though they knew something was wrong. 228 people died. The investigation that followed revealed something staggering. For over a decade, this airline had been losing aircraft at a rate 17 times higher than United Airlines. The United States military even banned its personnel from flying it. Delta Airlines and Air France suspended every partnership they had. The president of South Korea publicly called it a national embarrassment and refused to board any of its flights. The airline was Korean Air, and by the late 1990s, it was widely considered one of the most dangerous carriers on the planet. Now, fast forward to today. That same airline just bought its biggest competitor in a 4-year regulatory battle that 14 separate governments tried to slow down. The European Commission nearly killed the deal. The United States Department of Justice openly considered suing to block it. And yet, here we are. Korean Air now controls more than 230 aircraft. It flies to over 150 international destinations, together with its American partner, Delta, which is, to say the least, very ironic. Since Delta once ended the partnership in 1999 due to safety concerns, it now dominates 81% of every seat between South Korea and the United States. So in the next couple of minutes, you are going to learn how the same airline that was once banned by Pentagon staff quietly built the most powerful aviation empire Asia has ever seen, why every other carrier in the region is now scrambling to respond, and the one thing that could still bring this empire crashing down. To understand the merger, you first need to understand the transformation that came before it. Because Korean Air's safety record in the 1980s and 90s was catastrophic. From 1970 to 1999, 17 Korean Air aircraft were written off in serious incidents and crashes, roughly 700 lives lost. In 1999, Delta and Air France severed their alliance partnership. The Pentagon ordered American military personnel to use other carriers when flying through Asia. And then came the wake-up call. The Flight 801 disaster in Guam forced the South Korean government to step in. Korean Air launched one of the most aggressive cultural overhauls in aviation history. They hired David Greenberg, a former Delta executive, to rebuild the operation from scratch. They brought in foreign instructors. They restructured the entire cockpit hierarchy that had contributed to so many accidents. They mandated English as the working language of the flight deck. By 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration upgraded Korea's safety rating, and by 2005, Korean Air passed a full International Air Transport Association safety audit. And here is what almost nobody outside Asia really noticed. That same patience, that same willingness to grind through a multi-year transformation was about to be applied to something far bigger than safety. Because while Korean Air was quietly rebuilding its reputation, its biggest rival was falling apart in front of everyone. Asiana Airlines was born during the Seoul Olympics in 1988, founded by the Kumho Group as Korea's second flag carrier. From the outside, it looked perfect. A Star Alliance member, a fleet of Airbus A380s and A350-900s, flying to major cities around the world. But underneath that premium polish, Asiana Airlines was drowning in debt. By 2019, the airline's debt-to-equity ratio had ballooned past 2,000%. 2,000%. A healthy airline sits between 100 and 200. Asiana Airlines was a financial corpse still walking through the airport. The parent company, Kumho Asiana Group, scrambled for an exit. They lined up a buyer, a consortium led by HDC Hyundai Development that agreed to pay roughly 2.5 trillion won, roughly $1.7 billion for the airline. That deal collapsed in the middle of the pandemic when airline valuations cratered and the buyer walked away. Asiana Airlines fell into the hands of the state-run Korea Development Bank and its creditors. The carrier was surviving on emergency loans. Everyone in Seoul knew it could not stay there forever. That is when Walter Cho stepped in, the chairman of Korean Air's parent company, Hanjin Group. a Harvard-educated executive who saw what nobody else dared to act on. The pandemic was not a crisis for him. It was a discount. In November of 2020, Korean Air's board approved a plan to acquire Asiana Airlines for 1.5 trillion Korean won. The Korea Development Bank backed the move with 800 billion won in financing to Hanjin. Korean Air then raised an additional 3.3 trillion won through a massive share offering to fund the deal and pay down its own debt. Now think about the timing. Competitors were grounded. Asiana's valuation had collapsed. Fuel was historically cheap because nobody was flying. Walter Cho locked in a price that would have cost multiples more in normal market conditions. Bold, aggressive. Some even called it reckless. But there was a problem nobody at Hanjin saw coming. Buying Asiana Airlines on paper was the easy part. What followed was a 4-year regulatory marathon that tested Hanjin's patience to the absolute limit. 14 separate competition authorities had to sign off. South Korea, China, Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, the Philippines, Malaysia, Australia, the United Kingdom, Turkey, the European Union, and the United States. The European Commission was the most aggressive. Their antitrust investigators concluded the merger would restrict competition on routes to 4 major European markets: France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. They also flagged cargo dominance between Europe and Korea. At one point, the Commission suspended its entire investigation because Korean Air missed a deadline to submit corrective remedies. So how did Korean Air respond? 3 calculated moves. First, they designated T-Way Air, a South Korean low-cost carrier, as the remedy operator on 4 overlapping European routes: Barcelona, Frankfurt, Paris, and Rome. Korean Air agreed to provide T-Way Air with aircraft, flight crews, and maintenance services to keep those routes competitive. Second, they divested Asiana's entire freighter cargo business, which was eventually sold to Air Incheon, now rebranded as Air Zeta. Third, they kept negotiating quietly with the United States Department of Justice. The DOJ was reportedly preparing a lawsuit to block the deal over trans-Pacific monopoly concerns. That was not an empty threat. Reports surfaced that Justice Department lawyers were ready to file. But something shifted in the final months of 2024. The Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines merger had just sailed through American regulators with minimal resistance. The political winds were turning more favorable for airline consolidation. So did Cho's strategy work? In February of 2024, the European Commission granted conditional approval. In November of that same year, it issued the final blessing. Just days later, the DOJ stepped aside, and on December 12th, 2024, Korean Air officially closed the acquisition of a 63.88% stake in Asiana Airlines. After 4 years, 2 months, and 26 days, done. Cho had pulled off one of the most complex airline mergers in aviation history. Now, here is where the numbers start to get a little bit uncomfortable. Korean Air and Delta have run a trans-Pacific joint venture since May of 2018. The partnership grants them antitrust immunity. It lets them coordinate fares, schedules, and revenue sharing across the entire Pacific. Their combined network now reaches more than 290 destinations in the Americas and over 80 in Asia. The joint venture has served nearly 15 million customers since launch, and now moves roughly 4,000 connecting passengers through Seoul Incheon every single day. With Asiana absorbed into Korean Air, this single joint venture controls 81% of all seats between the United States and South Korea. I will repeat that in case you thought you heard it wrong. 81%. Industry analysts are already raising alarms. Delta has openly stated that the merger will push their trans-Pacific margins higher. In simple, plain English, those are very fancy words to actually say fares will go up. Then, in May of 2025, Korean Air and Delta jointly announced they were buying a 25% stake in Canada's WestJet for $550 million. Korean Air put in $220 million for 10%, Delta paid $330 million for 15%. The empire keeps growing. Inside South Korea, the the dominance is even sharper. The Korean Air Group now commands roughly 73% of the country's international passenger traffic. On flights between Korea and Japan alone, when you stack Korean Air, Asiana Airlines, Jin Air, Air Busan, and Air Seoul together, the group controls about 60% of every seat. The Asiana brand is leaving Star Alliance and moving under SkyTeam, where Korean Air has been a founding member since the year 2000. For millions of frequent flyers around the world, this is a seismic shift. Asiana has already suspended reservations for Star Alliance award tickets for flights departing this December onward. Financially, 2025 was a record year for revenue. 16.5 trillion won roughly $11.2 billion. But operating profit fell 19% year over year. Net income dropped 21% to 965 billion won. Higher fuel costs, soaring labor expenses, depreciation from new aircraft deliveries, and a persistently weak Korean won are all squeezing margins, even as the merger benefits start flowing in. But there are real cracks in the foundation. The integration of two massive workforces is brutal. Korean Air employees earn an average of 123 million won per year. Asiana Airlines employees average 92.63 million won. That is a gap of nearly 25%. Pilot seniority is the most explosive issue inside the company because the two airlines have different qualification standards. Korean Air's pilot union is already pushing back hard on how the seniority lists will merge. Walter Cho recently called an extraordinary executive seminar, gathering roughly 200 leaders from every domestic and overseas affiliate. The message was clear: either we integrate fast, or this whole empire falls apart from the inside. Then there is the fleet. Korean Air ordered 33 Airbus A350s from Toulouse in April of 2024, originally split between the -900 and the -1000 variants. In October of 2025, the airline converted 7 of those into A350F freighters, leaving 20 A350-1000s, 6 A350-900s, and 7 freighter variants. On top of that, 20 Boeing 777-9s are on order, plus 8 Boeing 777-8F for cargo. These new aircraft will eventually be replacing the aging Airbus A380s and the Boeing 747-8s. But because of delivery delays from both Airbus and Boeing, the older jumbos now have to fly well into the 2030s. To cement the new identity, Korean Air unveiled a complete rebrand on March 11th, 2025, designed by global consultancy Lippincott. The iconic red and blue Tagex symbol, gone and replaced with a darker, monochrome design and a custom typeface developed by studio Dalton Mogg. The aircraft no longer say Korean Air, just Korean. A Boeing 787-10 was the first jet to fly in the new livery, operating from Seoul Incheon to Tokyo Narita on March 12th. Beyond the visual identity, Korean Air revamped its entire premium dining program, replacing French-inspired menus with a modernized Korean menu developed by Seoul chef Si-kyung Kim. New Bernardaud porcelain and upgraded glassware now dress the first class and business cabins. The Asiana brand will be fully retired by January 1st, 2027. After 38 years, it disappears and will be absorbed in the Korean brand. And that brings us to the question every other airline in Asia is now asking. Can anyone actually compete with what Walter Cho has built? Singapore Airlines has its premium brand and the Changi hub. Cathay Pacific is still rebuilding after the pandemic. All Nippon Airways and Japan Airlines dominate Japan, but have shown no appetite for this kind of aggressive consolidation. None of them have a trans-Pacific partner like Delta willing to invest $550 million in a Canadian airline alongside them. None of them have a regulatory team that just outmaneuvered 14 separate competition authorities. What Cho has built is not just a bigger airline. It is an integrated aviation empire, a full-service flag carrier, 3 low-cost subsidiaries about to merge into one dominant brand, a massive cargo network, a fortress hub at Seoul Incheon, where 100 airlines now operate to 183 destinations across 53 countries. A trans-Pacific joint venture stretching from Atlanta to Auckland, and a new brand identity built for the next 40 years of global aviation. The risks are real. Labor disputes could slow integration to a crawl. Currency headwinds keep eating into margins. Aircraft delivery delays are forcing the airline to fly older jets longer than planned. Regulators in Seoul, Brussels, and Washington are watching every fare hike with a microscope, ready to intervene the moment Korean Air abuses its position. But if this team executes the operational integration with the same patience they showed during the 4-year regulatory marathon, and the same discipline they showed during the safety transformation 2 decades earlier, then we are not just watching an airline merger. We are watching the rise of an aviation superpower that will reshape every flag carrier consolidation conversation on the planet for the next 30 years. Now, I want your honest take. Do you believe Korean Air's monopoly will benefit passengers through better service, bigger networks, and stronger global connectivity? Or is this the moment when Asia's aviation market loses real competition forever, and we all start paying the price at the booking page? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this video helped you finally understand what just happened in Asia's aviation industry, hit that like button and subscribe to ExPlaned so the next deep dive lands straight in your feed. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.